Mark had always thought of himself as an ordinary guy, a mechanic by trade, a space traveler by necessity. Nothing too fancy. He fixed engines on various ships, from the humdrum freighters hauling cargo to the sleek luxury cruisers ferrying the rich and famous of the galaxy. He'd seen it all, well, almost all. The universe, after all, was vast, and it had a way of surprising even the most seasoned travelers. And on that particular day, it surprised him more than he could ever imagine. It all started with a malfunctioning engine on a small transport vessel, the Argo Venture. Mark had been contracted to make a quick fix. Nothing major, just some recalibrating on the ship's navigational system. But in his haste to get the job done, and the significant sum that came with it, he may have gotten a little too creative with his tools. The ship's AI, a friendly but slightly neurotic personality named Cassie, kept chirping warnings in his ear. "Mark, please refrain from using the wrench as a makeshift hammer. It is not calibrated for that purpose." Mark glanced at the AI's holographic projection, a rotating, translucent orb with a face that looked like it was perpetually confused. "Cassie, if you could just relax, I'll have this done in 10 minutes. You won't even know I was here." "I'm sure I will," Cassie replied dryly, her voice almost a sigh. "Also, I've detected an unusual energy fluctuation coming from the rear hull. It's highly irregular." "Energy fluctuation? Oh, come on, that's the last thing I need today. I'm not in the mood for—" Before Mark could finish his sentence, a strange hum reverberated through the ship, followed by a loud mechanical whine. He glanced at the control panel and immediately saw the problem. The hull had a breach in its energy shielding, one that no regular mechanic would have spotted, let alone someone with only basic training in space technology. But Mark wasn't an average mechanic. He had a knack for finding problems others missed, even if it meant poking around places he shouldn't be. "Well, Cassie, looks like we've got more work than we thought," he muttered to himself. "But no worries, I've got this." It took about 30 minutes longer than expected, but Mark finally sealed the breach. As he wiped the sweat off his brow, he couldn't help but feel a small sense of pride. Then, just as he was about to call it a day and collect his payment, the ship's holographic interface flared with a bright red warning. "Unauthorized breach of restricted systems detected." Mark blinked, staring at the screen. "Wait, what? I didn't breach any restricted systems. I fixed the damn hull." But the screen persisted, flashing with even more dire warnings. "Mark Collins, you have accessed systems designated for royal use only." Cassie's voice echoed with an ominous tone. "And you are now in violation of Galactic Law 47X, unauthorized access of restricted galactic property." Mark's heart skipped a beat. Galactic Law 47X? That was the big one, the kind of law that could get you executed or worse if you weren't careful. The kind of law that involved not just any system access, but a system that was specifically reserved for royalty or the highest-ranking members of the Galactic Order. And as he frantically scrolled through the data logs, Mark's stomach sank. The Argo Venture wasn't just a cargo ship. It was a royal vessel belonging to the most powerful empire in the galaxy, the Zalvorn. He cursed under his breath, rubbing his temples. "Oh, for the love of... what the hell was I thinking?" At that moment, his communicator buzzed, and a voice came through, clear, commanding, and surprisingly pleasant. "Mark Collins," the voice said, "you have been found guilty of breaching a restricted system aboard the royal vessel Argo Venture. Galactic law demands immediate punishment, and you are hereby ordered to surrender yourself to the nearest galactic authority for judgment." Mark's eyes widened. "Wait, what? I don't even know who you are. Can't we just, work something out here?" "You may call me Varys, and I'm here to help you avoid immediate imprisonment, if that's what you're concerned about," the voice replied. "But it's going to cost you. You see, the princess of the Zalvorn Empire is rather fond of unusual solutions to political problems, and she has made a very specific request regarding your case." Mark was about to protest when Varys cut him off. "I will transmit the coordinates of a royal envoy ship. If you want to avoid further complications, you'll meet us there. Trust me, you do not want to disobey. The princess is quite determined." Mark let out a long sigh. Great. Not only am I going to prison, but now I've got to meet some princess. This just keeps getting better. As he made his way to the docking bay to meet the royal envoy, Mark tried to calm himself. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad, he reasoned. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding. After all, royal families were known for their sense of humor, right? At least, that's what he told himself. He had no idea what he was about to walk into. The envoy ship was sleek, its hull gleaming in the light of the distant star. Mark stepped aboard with a nervous gulp, wondering what kind of galaxy-sized mess he had just gotten himself into. Moments later, he was ushered into a large room, where he came face to face with the envoy, a tall figure dressed in shimmering robes. And standing beside them was the last person Mark ever expected to meet, Princess Nyra, heir to the Zalvorn Empire. She was striking, tall, with skin that shimmered in shades of blue, and ears that extended to impossible lengths. Her gaze was sharp, calculating, but there was an odd warmth to her that Mark couldn't quite place. She regarded him with an appraising look. "You're the human who violated our law?" she asked, her voice as smooth and composed as an icy river. Mark swallowed. Yeah, that would be me." "Well, you've made quite an impression," she said, her lips curling into a smile that was both intimidating and strangely inviting. "And now you're going to marry me." Mark blinked, then burst into laughter. "Wait, what? I'm sorry, did you just say marry? Like marriage, Mary?" The princess tilted her head. "Yes, marriage. You see, it's the only way to avoid unpleasant consequences." Mark's mind raced. He had broken a law, yes, but this? Marry a princess? It was so absurd that all he could do was laugh. "I think you've got the wrong guy." "Oh, I assure you I don't," Nyra said, her tone darkening slightly. "You're exactly what I need." And just like that, Mark realized his life was no longer his own. Mark sat stiffly on an impossibly luxurious chair inside the royal cruiser, the Eclipsa, trying very hard not to hyperventilate. Across from him, Princess Nyra reclined with the effortless grace of someone who was very used to intimidating lesser beings, like him. The ship's interior gleamed with an almost excessive display of wealth, polished obsidian walls, intricate golden inlays, floating chandeliers that shimmered with contained plasma. Even the seats were probably worth more than Mark's entire career earnings. "So let me get this straight," Mark said, leaning forward and resting his elbows on his knees. "You want to marry me, as in actually marry, like vows and rings and—" He gestured vaguely. "Alien wedding cake and everything?" Nira's golden eyes studied him with amusement. "Something like that." Mark exhaled, rubbing his temples. "Okay, see, I feel like there are several steps between accidentally touching the wrong button and intergalactic marriage. You know, maybe a fine, a court date, maybe a really sternly worded letter." The princess smirked, the expression making her sharp features all the more unnerving. "A letter? My dear Mark, you insult the grandeur of Zalvorn law. Our judicial system is not a place for minor punishments. You either face lifelong exile in the penal asteroid fields, or you become my husband." Mark blinked. Wow, that escalated quickly. Nyra sipped from a crystalline goblet filled with something that, to Mark's concern, was faintly glowing. "Your presence has caused an unforeseen complication in Zalvorn politics," she continued. "Since you so boldly infiltrated a royal system, albeit accidentally, you have technically invoked a very ancient law. The simplest way to smooth things over without causing a diplomatic crisis is to integrate you into the royal family." Mark frowned. "Wait a second. If this law is so ancient, why not just ignore it?" Nyra gave him a pointed look. "Because galactic nobles love nothing more than exploiting loopholes. If I ignore this, my enemies will claim I am weak, that I let an outsider insult our traditions without consequence. And if I allow you to be executed, well," she shrugged. "Let's just say the Galactic Council frowns upon unnecessary violence toward species that have not yet reached interstellar government status. Your Earth is still in its cute little primitive phase, so we can't just dispose of you." This is the most efficient solution. Mark narrowed his eyes. You keep saying efficient like it's the same as sane. Nira's lips quirked. Welcome to intergalactic politics. Mark groaned, leaning back in his chair. Okay, so let's say I go along with this. What exactly does being your husband entail? And more importantly, will I be expected to wear weird hats? Nira raised a delicate brow. Hats? You know, ceremonial headgear. I just have one of those faces that don't look good in hats. Nira actually laughed at that, a low musical sound. You're quite the peculiar human. You don't know the half of it, Mark muttered. A moment of silence passed between them before Mark sighed and scrubbed a hand down his face. All right, let's say I agree. What happens next? Nira gestured toward the large window behind her, where the swirling colors of hyperspace blurred like an infinite oil painting. We're en route to Zalvorn Prime. When we arrive, we will announce our union to the court, and you will begin learning how to conduct yourself as my consort. Mark arched a brow. Consort? That sounds very medieval. Nira smirked. Galactic royalty is nothing if not traditional. Mark shook his head. Great. So I go from fixing broken ship engines to navigating intergalactic court politics. I'm sure that'll go just fine. No chance of me accidentally offending some six-eyed duke and starting a planetary war, right? Nira's expression turned thoughtful. Now that you mention it, you should probably avoid direct eye contact with the House of Shikar. They consider it a challenge to the death. Mark threw his hands up. Of course they do. The Eclipsa soon exited hyperspace, revealing the jewel of the Zalvorn Empire, Zalvorn Prime. Mark had seen plenty of impressive planets, but nothing quite like this. The entire world was a masterpiece of advanced engineering and nature in perfect harmony. Towering crystalline structures reflected the soft glow of twin suns, and floating platforms connected sprawling districts suspended in midair. The capital city was a breathtaking expanse of shimmering towers and winding sky bridges, each adorned with cascading bioluminescent flora. Mark whistled. Okay, I'll give you this. Your planet is stunning. Nira nodded, her expression unreadable. It is our pride. Mark could tell there was more to her words, but before he could ask, the ship docked at the Imperial Palace, an awe-inspiring fortress of black stone and gold, its spires piercing the sky like elegant daggers. The moment Mark stepped off the ship, he felt the weight of 100 eyes on him. Nobles, guards, officials, each one examining him with a mix of curiosity, disdain, and barely concealed amusement. Well, this is fun, he muttered under his breath. Nira stood tall beside him, radiating the kind of regal confidence Mark could never hope to achieve. Come, she said, placing a hand lightly on his arm. We have a ceremony to prepare for. Mark swallowed hard. He had no idea how he was going to survive this. But one thing was certain, his life would never be boring again. Mark never thought he'd be the type of guy to stand in front of a grand hall filled with intergalactic dignitaries, wearing a ceremonial robe that was entirely too tight around the collar, about to marry a powerful alien princess. And yet, here he was, standing on an intricately designed floating platform in the middle of Zalvorn Prime's royal palace, sweating profusely. Thousands of Zalvorn nobles watched from their elevated seating, their jewel-encrusted garments shimmering under the glow of hovering energy lanterns. Massive banners depicting the royal sigil fluttered in the artificial breeze, and an orchestra of floating instruments played an eerie but oddly catchy tune. The whole event felt like some sort of cosmic fever dream. Next to him, Princess Nira stood with her usual regal composure, her long golden hair woven into elaborate braids that signified her royal status. Her blue-tinted skin practically glowed under the ceremonial lights, and her sharp golden eyes studied Mark with an expression that was either mild amusement or quiet resignation. You look like you're about to pass out, Nira whispered, tilting her head slightly toward him. I might, Mark admitted, tugging at the collar of his robe. Do Zalvorn weddings always feel like a high-stakes political hostage situation? Nira smirked. Only when they involve humans who break ancient laws and accidentally become royal consorts. Fantastic, Mark muttered. Well, if I do faint, just prop me up long enough to say, I do. Before Nira could respond, the High Minister of Galactic Unions, a floating, jellyfish-like entity with 6 eyes and a voice like rustling paper, glided forward. It raised 2 tentacle-like appendages, signaling for silence. We are gathered here to witness the sacred union of Princess Naira of the Zalvorn Empire and Mark Collins of Terra, the minister announced in its deep, undulating tone. Let this bond serve as a symbol of unity between our people and as the official legal resolution to one of the strangest violations of galactic law in recent history. Mark sighed. Glad to know my marriage is also a bureaucratic footnote. Nira fought back a laugh as the minister continued. By these sacred customs of the Zalvorn, do you, Princess Naira, accept this union? Naira nodded, her voice clear and unwavering. I do. The minister turned its many eyes toward Mark. And do you, Mark Collins, accept this union? Mark hesitated. It wasn't that he was unsure. Well, okay, he was unsure, but not in the way he had been before. When this whole fiasco started, he would have done anything to escape. But over the past few weeks, something had shifted. He'd seen sides of Nira beyond her regal, calculating exterior. He'd seen her frustration with the pressures of royalty, her amusement at his awkwardness, and even rare glimpses of vulnerability when she thought no one was looking. And despite the ridiculous circumstances, despite the politics and the absurdity of it all, Mark had come to admire her, maybe even like her. He exhaled and, with a lopsided grin, said, I do. But just so we're clear, this doesn't mean I have to start using fancy titles, right? Naira rolled her eyes, but there was warmth in her gaze. We'll negotiate. The minister raised its appendages once more. Then, by the authority vested in me by the Zalvorn Empire and the Galactic Council, I pronounce this union official. May your bond bring prosperity and stability to both our worlds. A wave of polite applause swept through the hall, though Mark noticed that some of the more traditionalist nobles looked like they'd swallowed something unpleasant. He figured they weren't thrilled about a scrappy human mechanic joining the royal family. As the ceremony concluded and the guests began filtering into the grand banquet hall for the post-wedding festivities, Mark leaned toward Nira. So, what happens now? Do we have to do some kind of elaborate first dance? Because I should warn you, my dance moves are legally classified as a war crime in 3-star systems. Naira smirked. No dancing required, but there is a formal reception where you'll be expected to speak. Mark groaned. Great. Public speaking. My favorite. The reception was mostly uneventful. If you didn't count the diplomatic scuffle when a noble from the house of Ixcar mistook Mark's casual nod as a battle challenge. Fortunately, Naira had stepped in before things got too violent. Hours later, after what felt like an eternity of handshakes, diplomatic pleasantries, and explaining that, no, humans did not have retractable fangs, Mark finally collapsed onto a plush seating area in Nira's private quarters. Naira sat across from him, studying him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. You did well today, she said finally. Mark snorted. I survived. Let's not set the bar too high. She tilted her head. You're adjusting faster than I expected. Mark hesitated before shrugging. Look, I know I wasn't exactly thrilled about this whole royal husband situation at first, but I get why you did it, and I get why this is important. He glanced at her. You're under a lot of pressure. I may not be a fancy diplomat, but I know what it's like to have people expecting things from you. Naira's gaze softened slightly. You understand more than most. For a moment, they sat in companionable silence. Then Mark smirked. So, do I get an official royal title now? Maybe something cool, like Supreme Galactic Spanner Wielder? Naira laughed. How about Consort of the Zalvorn Empire? Mark made a face. Ugh, too formal. Can I just be Mark, guy who avoided execution via accidental marriage? Nira shook her head, amusement dancing in her golden eyes. You really are insufferable. You married me. That's on you. Nira smiled, and for the first time, it wasn't the carefully composed smile of a princess, but something warmer. And just like that, Mark realized that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't entirely opposed to this ridiculous new life. Sure, he was now married to one of the most powerful women in the galaxy. Sure, he was tangled in a web of intergalactic politics, ancient traditions, and nobles who probably wanted him dead. But at least it wouldn't be boring.